So if you were to put tons of compost in your garden and plant all, 10 different varieties of squash and then save them for a few years and you always put tons of compost in your garden, you'll never know if those plants could have survived in just your native soil without a whole lot of care, right? Because you've
Exactly.
selected them to be lazy.
Well, you get what you select for, even if the selection is inadvertent. And if you're selecting for high input, then you're always going to have to provide high input for those varieties to do good or to do optimal. And I tend to be a lazy gardener. I don't want to pay for the inputs. I don't want to put the labor in to put it on. I don't want to put trellises up. And so I grow my tomatoes sprawling in the dirt. And if they can't grow that way, they don't belong in my garden.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess you would, I mean, some varieties of tomatoes tend to put the fruit right down on the ground, and other ones tend to kind of, they almost hold them up a little bit. They've kind of
Uh-huh.
got a little bit of a, because here, if anything touches the ground, it's so moist. There's always insects underneath it. If I have a tomato touch the ground, the whole bottom of it will get shredded. It'll look beautiful from the top, and I'll put my hand into goo when I try to pull it out of the garden.
Yeah, well, some of these wild tomatoes that I've been working with grow almost like shrubbery. And so they got these big upright woody stems and they keep the tomatoes way up high off of the ground. And
That's a good trait.
that is a lovely trait.
So if we've been growing tomato varieties and tying them to stakes for 300 years,
Uh,
we've been teaching them to be weak for 300 years and for their stems to be so weak they can't support themselves. It's basically
right,
like you never let your child go walk. You're just going to sit inside and watch TV all day, and then later you wonder why the kid's not an athlete. They
right.
never. That's interesting. And you wonder how much the epigenetics too get triggered by you're making it lazy, like it never had to work. And so are its kids going to be lazy too? You know?
Well, yeah, so one of the most interesting things I learned this growing season was Chef Dan Barber sent some of my tomato seeds to Dr. James White at New Jersey, let's see, Rutgers University in New Jersey. And they tested my tomatoes and they found that nitrogen fixing bacteria are living inside the roots of my tomatoes. So because I have put no fertilizer on my garden for the last 14 years, those tomatoes and the microbes had to figure out a way to survive. And
Wow.
and that's the way that they figured it out.
So you may think in the first couple of years that look at this stuff is not growing well. This is not, I don't know how happy any of these, but there may be a shift that's taking place as the generations go on and those genes resort. Like they're just pulling
Well,
out
well,
new blades from the Swiss Army knife until hopefully one of them catches, and then suddenly you have a plant that's almost wild in its ability to live in your soil, right? That's the kind of the goal.
yeah, well, like the first year, anything that isn't suitable to my garden, it just goes ahead and dies. And then the second year, the strongest of the strongest are crossing with each other, so that by the third year, I call it the magical year when things just thrive.